Hi there everyone, I'm meteorologist Jillian Johnson. I hope you've been staying cool in this scorching heat. Thanks for joining us for this week's Weather Extra. We have lots to cover in today's show, so let's jump right into the top weather story of the week by taking a look back at the devastating flooding that took place across the northeastern United States. Millions of Americans from Pennsylvania to New York through New England have been cleaning up after deadly and historic flooding inundated cities and towns across the region last week. A slow-moving cold front brought round after round of heavy rain, submerging cities and towns under several feet of water. Floodwaters rose, destroying structures, washing away roads, and left thousands fleeing from their homes. Vermont was one of the states that saw the worst damage. At one point, nearly the entire state was under a flash flood warning. The governor called the flooding historic and catastrophic. Widespread rainfall totals of 6 to 9 inches fell along the Green Mountains, which left those living in lower-lying valleys with feet of runoff, forcing everyone to reach higher ground. Officials say the state of Vermont hasn't seen floodwaters this high since the Great Flood back in 1927. And parts of New York dealt with deadly flooding too last week. At least one woman was killed as floodwaters swept her away while walking along a road. Rainfall reports reached up to 8 inches in some of the hardest hit areas across New York's lower Hudson Valley. Roads and parking lots were filled with floodwaters, prompting dozens of rescues from stranded drivers. So much rain fell that mudslides were even reported across the state. Tens of millions of dollars in damage has been left behind in the Northeast after this historic rain event. We bring in Chief Meteorologist Brady Taylor, who has an in-depth look at some of the rain totals that fell across the Northeast last week. Brady.
Yeah, Jillian, some very impressive rainfall totals and historic totals across much of the Northeast. You see that strip that worked through parts of New York, Connecticut, up into parts of Vermont and New Hampshire. And these totals, which are around 5 to 8 inches in many locations, compares to the very high totals that were seen back in 2011 from Hurricane Irene. That actually was a tropical storm as it worked its way up the Northeast coast more and brought that heavy rain, but very high levels. And a good way to see how bad this amount of rain in a short amount of time was. This is a look at the rain gauge, or the river gauge, at the Winooski River in the capital Vermont, Mount Pierre. Now, it rose from its normal level at about 5 foot up to flood stage over 20 feet. That's 2 foot higher than that river climbed during Hurricane Irene. So a ton of water in a very short amount of time.
Well, thanks, Brady. Lately for us here in Central Texas, we've seen the opposite of what the Northeast has seen. Very little rain has fallen as we made our way into summer. In fact, since June 1st, we've seen less than half of an inch. Now, for more on how much rain has fallen in Central Texas and an updated look on our drought monitor, here's meteorologist C.D. Finley.
Well, that is right, Jillian. The dry conditions have definitely been felt all over Central Texas, especially in our western counties. There's a bit of a severe drought the further west you look, but the further east you look, looks like it's getting a little less dry, but even that has changed over the last several days. It is now a little bit more abnormally dry in our eastern counties. So as we head further into the month of July, it is definitely going to continue to get drier. But as far as how much rain we've seen up to this point this year, we've seen quite a little bit. Most of us here in Central Texas have seen somewhere between 10 to 20 inches, but you may have noticed there's just a little bit of a sliver here out west that's just below 10 inches. And that's right where that severe drought is. So areas up to our west have seen a little bit less rain, but even again, as you look further east, a little over 20 inches in areas east of the I-35 corridor. So that's why these areas out east may be a little bit less dry. But even so, all across Central Texas, unless you're east of the I-35 corridor, we're sitting a little bit below average. Average up to this point this year is 20.53 inches, and most of us here in Central Texas are sitting below that. So even with as much rain as we've seen as of late, we're still below average for this time of year. Now, as we go into the next few months, that number will hopefully start to increase. July is usually our driest month of the year, but as we head further into August and September, those numbers will start to slowly increase, and then heading into October, which is usually our second wettest month of the year, we may finally see about 4 inches of monthly rain. So those rain totals will start to continue to go further up as we head out of the summer.
And in other top weather stories this week, tornadoes tearing through near the Great Lakes to fires out west. It's been a busy week of weather. Take a look. Numerous confirmed tornadoes tore across Illinois on Wednesday, damaging homes and tearing down trees. Chicago's O'Hare Airport was placed under tornado warnings, which prompted a ground stop of all planes and forced passengers waiting on flights to get into their safe space inside the airport. There's been reported tornado damage to nearby warehouses and neighborhoods that sit just outside of the airport. In California started off the year with unimaginable amounts of rain and snow, but heading into the summer months, the state has been slammed with above normal temperatures and very little rainfall. They are dealing with the heat wave like us in central Texas. As those temperatures have soared, firefighters have also been dealing with an uptick of wildfires across the state. Here's a look at a grass fire that developed just off a highway in Los Angeles County last week. Also in Southern California, a landslide took out multiple homes in LA County. The unofficial cause to these landslides are still under investigation, but officials say the Earth's movement has slowed down in recent days. Well, switching gears and heading over to meteorologist Sean Bellafiore, who joins us now to talk more about Saharan dust, what it is and how it impacts the tropical development. Sean.
This segment of Weather Extra this week is going to be talking a lot about Sahara desert dust that is moving its way across the Atlantic. And to talk about the dust, we have to kind of talk about the tropics a little bit too. I want to point out that in the main development region of the tropics right here, notice that there really isn't much cloud coverage. Now, it's a moist environment across the tropics and across the Atlantic, of course, because of all the water, but we just really haven't had those clouds form, and it's because of a big plume of dust that has been moving off of Africa over the past couple of days. You can actually see still some pretty heavy dust concentrations filtering into this dust blob, so to speak. Now, when we talk about tropical storms and hurricanes developing, there's a couple of different things that you need, and the dust helps to prevent those storms from forming. As the dust gets picked up by strong winds across Africa, it gets pushed into the atmosphere and shuttled across the Atlantic into the tropics. Now, when we're talking about tropical storms and hurricanes, we need sea surface temperatures of 80 degrees or above and abundant moisture in the atmosphere, which, of course, it's over the ocean. The atmosphere is going to be moisture rich, but that plume of dust not only blocks some of the sunlight coming in, which could cause sea surface temperatures to drop, but it dries the air out, so that moisture-rich atmosphere starts to turn a little bit more desert-like, stopping tropical storms and hurricanes from forming. So here is this big dust plume. It is pretty expansive if you take a look at it, but watch what happens over the next couple of days as it moves its way westward. Some of that dust will just naturally filter out, but especially in the Caribbean, we're talking Cuba, the Bahamas, Hispaniola, Puerto Rico. That is where the dusty and hazy skies will really be most concentrated as we move into this upcoming weekend. The upper level winds are going to shove most of that dust towards Central America, but some of that dust could return to our area late this weekend and into the following week. That'll give us some hazy skies and also vibrant sunrises and sunsets. Reporting in the studio, Sean Bellafiore, KWTX News 10.
All right, thank you, Sean. Straight ahead on Weather Extra, we find out why some scientists are saying 2023 could possibly become the world's hottest year on record. Stick with us. Welcome back to Weather Extra. 2023 is shaping up to be one for the record books, and not in a good way. Climate scientists are now fearing 2023 could be the hottest year on record. Last month, the world experienced its warmest June on record by a substantial margin. That's according to a report by the European Union's Copernicus Climate Change Service. And last week, the planet's average daily temperature soared to highs unseen in modern records, kept by two climate agencies in Europe and right here in the U.S. One scientist says the records are likely the highest in at least 100,000 years. Surface temperatures in the oceans also reached record levels last month for June. Temperatures in parts of the North Atlantic were 9 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than usual. And on top of the record-breaking temperatures, the world will also be seeing the impact of the arrival of the El Niño climate phenomenon, which has a heating effect. And just as you heard, the planet's average daily temperature reached record highs multiple times last week. A new record was set back on Monday, July 3rd, with the global average temperature reaching 62.62 degrees Fahrenheit. This breaks the old record of 62.46 degrees set back in August 13th of 2016. Monday's record was quickly broken on Tuesday as the average global temperature soared to 62.92 degrees Fahrenheit. And on Wednesday, we would see a repeat of Tuesday's global temperature. But as Thursday, July 6th rolled around, we set another record for our planet Earth as the average global temperature reached 63.01 degrees Fahrenheit. You may have heard of the term urban heat island, which occurs when a city experiences much warmer temperatures than nearby rural areas. Some major metro areas in Texas are considered heat islands, and Olivia Leach has more on why Dallas is one of those cities and how local residents are being asked to help with research to see which areas are hotter than others.
You don't need us to tell you that Dallas has been hot the past few weeks, but did you know that scientists consider Dallas a heat island?
What an urban heat island is, it's the fact that cities are typically much warmer than your nearby, more vegetated rural areas due to factors of the built environment.
All that concrete and buildings traps heat during the day and radiates that heat back out into communities.
And that is what leads to cities being typically 15 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit hotter in some instances.
The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, selected Dallas as one of the 18 communities across the country that will be included in their Urban Heat Island mapping campaign. The study will determine which neighborhoods in Dallas are hotter than others.
It can really help the city in trying to implement cooling solutions in the city, and maybe that can help with some policies of really trying to address heat too.
In order to accurately map heat across the city, they're going to need Dallas residents to help.
Volunteers from the city of Dallas will go out and collect air temperature data as well as humidity data with a sensor that they attach to either their car or their bike.
Researchers say it's a great way to impact the future of your community.
Are concerned about heat, and so if we're starting to take actions and build our cities to be cooler, I think hopefully we'll be okay.
In Dallas, Olivia Leach, CBS News, Texas.
Up next on Weather Extra, we take a look at this week's Degrees of Science with Chief Meteorologist Brady Taylor, who sat down with an astronomical society from right here in Central Texas. Find out what they do right after the break.
Welcome to this week's Degrees of Science. Got a cool topic with you. I got joined by Johnny Barton and Dave Eisfeld, who got a cool group that y'all have. Tell us about your society y'all have.
Well, I appreciate you welcoming us to your program. The Central Texas Astronomical Society is the local astronomy club, and we're members of. There's about 150 astronomy enthusiasts of various degrees. We actually operate a research grade observatory with a 24-inch telescope out between Clifton and Gatesville. And like I say, we have people that are involved in different degrees, people that just like to come out and sit out a lawn chair and look up at the dark sky, people that have their own telescopes that like to come out and do their own program observing. We have people involved in astrophotography, and we have people that just like to do the public outreach that we do once a month. We have a public observatory open to the public, open house, the third Saturday of every month. We also have a star party that we conduct at the Hubbard City Lakes once a month. And so we just invite everybody to go to our website. It's centexastronomy.org. We are a 501c3 organization. And just go to the calendar and just look on there. We like people to just register if they're coming out for the open house. This way we know how many people are coming. It's free, there's no charge. It's just a really good, fun event for the whole family.
All right, so Dave, what got, I love to see what kind of gets y'all interested. What got you interested in being part of this society?
Well, I actually saw a TV show that had where they showed the different constellations in the sky, and it was really interesting, and I turned around and bought me a little 8-inch Dobb telescope, and from then on.
It's a lifelong passion, it
Yeah,
sounds like.
it is.
Yeah, and Central Texas is a pretty good area to do astronomy. I know we've talked to experts that talk about, the cities are starting to take away some of that dark sky, but there's plenty of areas you can really get a good view, right?
Light pollution is a bad thing for astronomy. But we do actually have a pretty dark sky out at the observatory site out between Clifton and Gatesville. We're actually up on about a 1,000-foot bluff there. And I may add that the observatory was done by a donation by the Meyer Foundation. Paul and Jane Meyer donated the funds for our observatory. Charles and Dorothy Turner actually donated the property. We're sitting on a 5-acre tract out there. And so we're very grateful to those people. And so we have a really nice site out there for everybody to come to.
If somebody wanted to go out there and when y'all do your open house, what can y'all see that people wouldn't expect from that observatory out there?
Well, the main thing most people are amazed is you come out and you can actually see the Milky Way. It looks like a cloud. People get upset. They say, well, we got clouds coming in. No, that's not an actual cloud. That's the Milky Way. And so you can see a lot of things that you can't normally see in the city.
So, a lot of people talk about, professional astronomers, but your hobby astronomers, y'all do a lot to help out when it comes to research, right?
Yeah, and getting into the research, and we're associated with another group that we do our research with. Actually, we do a lot of research with our observatory, with our local group. But Dave and I are associated with another group of amateur astronomers called the International Occultation Timing Association, and that's a mouthful to say. Yeah. And I refer to them as the IOTA. And they're a group of amateur astronomers that got formed about 1975, and they realized the value into doing occultation timings on different celestial objects that we have, like the planets and mainly the asteroids. When an asteroid passes in front of a star, it's called an occultation. It blocks the light of the star. And in the animation, it shows a blue line that dips down as the asteroid passes in front of the star. It's called a light curve. And the light curve then dips down, and when the star comes back out from behind the asteroid, then the light curve comes back up. And that little dip is what we time, and that actually gives us a very accurate measurement of the asteroid. A lot of people ask me, what we do, and a lot of people that I show my observatory to, they say, well, what do you do here? I say, well, I measure and determine the shape and size of asteroids. And then they give you a little funny look, so how do you do that? And so that is how we do it.
You can find out more about the Central Texas Astronomical Society and this week's Degrees of Science by scanning the QR code on your screen right now to watch on YouTube, or go to KWTX.com/degrees of science. Weather Extra returns after this. Welcome back to Weather Extra. The extreme heat isn't only impacting life on land, but it's also impacting life in our oceans too. Experts are calling this a marine heat wave, and it's threatening coral reefs in Florida and the Caribbean. In order to thrive, coral reefs need water temperatures in the mid-80s. Sea surface temperatures have reached as high as 95 degrees so far this year, and we haven't even reached a peak heating season, which is typically in August or September. Researchers recording these hot ocean temperatures say they pose severe risk to coral reefs and other marine life. If the water is too hot, it causes stress that can lead to bleaching and possibly death of the coral. In fact, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration says from now through October, there's a 60% chance for coral mortality across the Caribbean Sea and South Florida. And oysters play an important role in the health of our oceans and seas. The reefs where oysters grow are one of the planet's most at-risk marine habitats. Just like in Florida, where more than 70% of oyster reefs have disappeared in the last half-century. But one group is trying to reverse that decline near Pensacola. Mark Strassman brings us the story of marine rebirth. Take a look.
Growing a 3-inch oyster, traditionally a wild oyster, 3 inches takes 3 years.
Pascal Gibson, a commercial fisherman, grew up on these waters off Florida's panhandle. It's oysters used to feed his family. That stopped a decade ago.
Zero industry today.
Nothing.
Nothing. No commercial harvest of wild oysters.
Oysters matter. We eat them. They're an estuary's cleaning crew. One adult oyster filters 50 gallons a day. But for commercial fishermen, Florida's Gulf Coast is no longer their oyster.
What we didn't see is oyster habitat.
Ann Birch works for the Nature Conservancy, a global conservation group steering a multi-million-dollar project to resurrect oysters here.
Clearly, everything was in rough shape.
Yes, and the oil spill only enhanced it.
Day 44, the latest attempt to contain the spill hits a new snag, and the oil spreads ever closer to Florida.
Crude oil gushed like a gaping wound into the Gulf for nearly 5 months in 2010. BP was found criminally and civilly liable. The company had to fund a $20 billion compensation fund for affected states like Florida. $13 million of that paid to restore these oyster reefs, even though oil never reached these waters. Late last year, cranes on barges began building oyster reefs. Oyster larvae need something to cling to, like rocks, then grow on top of each other. Think oyster condos.
This is exactly what we want to see.
At low tide, Birch and I waded out to one of the 33 new reefs.
This is a rock from one of the restored oyster reefs that have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 oysters already settled on it.
These oysters will be for habitats, not harvesting. No commercial fishing.
Already noticing a big difference.
Already noticing a big difference.
As soon as next summer, Gibson hopes commercial fishermen will see fish in greater numbers here. Conservation is a long game. Evaluating meaningful progress here will take years. Maybe for the first time, building coastal condos means environmental progress. Mark Strassman, Santa Rosa County, Florida.
Well, that's all we have for you on this week's episode of Weather Extra. As a reminder, before we go, the dangerous heat is here to stay once again this week, so make sure you continue to practice those heat safety tips. Tune in again next weekend for another half hour of weather and science. Have a great week and see you next time.